Dr. Pedre, thank you so much.
I am very excited for this conversation. I've been following you on Instagram. I love what you stand for. I think what you're doing and questioning a lot of things that I think that many people take for granted and how it may affect our health. I think we need more people like you out there.
Thank you so much. Dr. Pedre, what does health mean to you?
Ooh, that's a very good question and very broad. I think health ultimately means not just physical health, but feeling balanced physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. I think of this pyramid. So if you imagine a pyramid that's divided into 3 sections, and the base of the pyramid is physical health. But in order to ultimately have fully actualized health, you need to have the full pyramid. So the base is your physical health. So you can't bypass that. Like a lot of people maybe they jump to the spiritual, like they're doing a lot of spiritual awareness and work, but they're not really addressing the physical part. And eventually it's going to break down. So the base is physical. The middle of the pyramid, if you can imagine a pyramid divided into 3 sections, the middle is the mental, emotional health. And then the very top of the pyramid is our spiritual health. And you won't feel complete. You know, you could be going to therapy, you could be doing everything you can for your mental health, and yet there's going to be something lacking if you're not addressing the spiritual aspect of life as well. And I think when you combine all of these aspects together, is what you get is holistic health. It's holistic well-being.
Interesting. That's actually the first time that I hear that like you blend them 3 together, and that's when you get the holistic health. I hadn't heard it before.
I always have like these weird, like sometimes for me, I think in visual cues and images. So sometimes I'll have a dream. Like this was one day I just had this vision of a pyramid, and that the pyramid represented exactly what health should be: the physical, the mental, emotional, and the spiritual at the very top. And just from 20 plus years of working with people and seeing people who are doing everything physically right, and yet they still don't feel fulfilled. They're not happy. There's something lacking in their lives. And that's why I think that you have to address all these levels in order to have ultimate health. If you just were physically healthy, but inside your mental health is horrible, or there's no spirituality, then I think you're missing part of the picture.
And why do you believe the gut is the gateway to overall health? And what led you to specialize in gut health?
I'll tell you that we have to think of the gut as the root system of the body, in the same way that the roots of a tree are the tree's the source of all of the tree's nutrition. Our gut is like the root system of our body. Without it, nothing else can thrive. Everything is connected to the gut: the brain, the lungs, skin health, immune health, metabolism, blood sugar regulation. All of these things are controlled by the gut. And for centuries, I think if you look at ancient medicine, they understood that. They knew the central role that the gut plays in our health. Chinese medicine, going back to Greek medicine, and then somewhere along the way it was lost. And in the 1900s, the 20th century, medicine became very pharmaceutical driven. Not surprisingly, we had some really amazing discoveries like penicillin. Like suddenly we can cure infections. So we had penicillin for World War II. So soldiers, when they got injuries, they wouldn't die from it so it was pretty miraculous, So I think then it just kind of distorted our viewpoint, and medicine became very pharmaceutical oriented. And I think now we're kind of coming back around on that loop and recognizing that there is this incredible world inside of us that was neglected, and the power that it has over our health was minimized, right?
But still parts of Asia, they still have that way of seeing medicine, right?
Exactly. Like Chinese medicine, looks at the connection, the importance of the gut. I think in worldwide, like the worldwide consciousness in Western medicine is coming around to recognize how important the gut is, because without the gut, you don't have your nutrition, you don't absorb nutrients properly. If you have leaky gut, then you're going to have a lot of inflammation in the body, and that leads to a whole host of chronic degenerative diseases, from the brain to the immune system to weight gain. So to me, the gut is the foundation, in the same way that you wouldn't build a house without first laying down a firm foundation. So if we're going back and thinking about that pyramid, the very bottom of the part of the pyramid that is the foundation of the pyramid, the foundation of physical health, would be the gut. And then everything else is built on top of that.
Could you explain why diversity in gut bacteria is so important for our health?
This is so key. And this is something I talked about in my most recent book, the GutSMART Protocol. Diversity to me is like the holy grail of health. The studies are showing that diversity is equivalent with less inflammation and less chronic disease. Since inflammation is the primary driver of every chronic degenerative disease, when they look at the effects of diversity in the gut, what they find is that it improves the gut barrier, it improves immune function, and it lowers up to 19 different inflammatory markers, including certain like cytotoxic, like cellular white blood cell activating cytokines get reduced when your gut microbiome is more diverse. And by diverse, what that means is that there's a wide representation of a lot of different bacterial species of many different types. And ideally, a lot of anti-inflammatory bacteria that reduce inflammation in the body. It was interesting because when they looked at the gut microbiome of centenarians, what they found that was different in centenarians from, let's say, people in their 80s, but that have 5 chronic diseases and are taking a ton of different medications, the centenarians had a higher predominance of bacteria that reduce inflammation, that actually fight inflammation in the body. So again, we're looking at the ways that the gut maybe is playing a background role in our health in ways that we didn't really understand before, because we either weren't looking or we didn't have the tools to look in the detail that we have now with PCR testing and whole genome testing and all that.
That's so fascinating. So when we discuss diversity in the gut, how do we distinguish between beneficial and harmful bacteria?
It's a good question, because the balance is not in just having good bacteria, right? If I take you to the Amazon rainforest, not everything that's in the rainforest is friendly, right? There are predators in the rainforest. There are jaguar. There are animals of prey. And yet, when you look at the ecosystem holistically, you understand that the predator is an essential part of the entire ecosystem, and it helps to create balance in that. When they were trying to lower the wolf population in Yellowstone National Park, and when they did that, they found that it created an incredible imbalance in the ecosystem, and other animals started predominating, and you had too many deer, and it was causing a whole problem in the ecosystem. So they actually had to reintroduce wolves back into Yellowstone National Park. And I talk about that because the same way that we think of a rainforest or an ecosystem, that's what we have inside our gut. It's an entire ecosystem. And that ecosystem is going to have some predators, it's going to have some bad bugs, some bullies, but predominantly it's going to have good bugs. Now, you have to wonder, because I think we haven't fully understood why, but in a normal gut, there's going to be about 10 to 15% bad bugs. And the question is, are they really bad, or are they acting as a hormetic stressor that is keeping the entire ecosystem in balance? I'll give you another example. Going to the Hadza, the hunter-gatherers in Africa. So I was really fascinated with them and got invited to go on a trip with a small group of people where we could stay with the Hadza for 3 days. And the reason that I really wanted to like firsthand see how they live is because they had done gut microbiome testing on the Hadza, and they have an incredibly diverse gut microbiome. Now, one thing I didn't mention is that the biggest threat to biodiversity is the miraculous discovery of the 1900s, antibiotics. So we've gone from, using antibiotics to save lives to overprescribing antibiotics for almost every infection, and that's destroying diversity in the gut. So someone like the Hadza, who are living out in the bush, who are raised naturally, they use herbs to treat infections, they've never been on antibiotics, their gut diversity is incredible. Well, why is that important? Would it even matter? What's so unique about the Hadza? Well, there's no diabetes, no heart disease, no cancer, no metabolic disease, no obesity. So they're devoid of all of the diseases of the Western world.
And do they still have these 10 to 15% bad bacteria in their gut?
So it's quite interesting because they actually harbor certain types of bacteria that probably in a Western gut would not do so well. For example, they have Treponema in their gut, which is the bacteria that causes syphilis. And yet the Treponema is also really skilled at breaking down fiber, and they have a very high fiber diet. So they eat root vegetables that are very chewy. They're almost like, if you know jicama, like a crunchy, watery potato, kind of like very starchy. They'll eat that raw. They'll dig it up from the ground. So they're hunter-gatherers, which, by the way, is what humans were for 95% of our history. The last 2,000 plus years is only a fraction of the amount of time that humans have been on Earth. And for the majority of that time, we were hunter-gatherers. So they hunt for small to medium, sometimes large animals, but also they go looking for root vegetables and eat them raw. They forage for honey, and they'll eat everything. So the honeycomb, even the bees, these are really tiny bees in Africa. They almost look like flies.
They're smaller than the ones that we have in the Western world.
Yeah, they don't look anything like what we have. So when I was out with them and we went hunting and foraging, and they found this beehive, the bees there actually bore a hole into the inside of a trunk, and they build the hive inside a tree trunk. So you have to cut the tree open to be able to get the honey. And I actually have pictures of that if you ever wanted to see. And so I was with them, and it's like, put your hands out, and they poured honey onto my hand with honeycomb, and some of the bees were trapped there.
And you eat it all?
I just ate it all because I'm with the Hadza and I don't want to be rude, but also I wanted to have the full experience of being out there. Wild honey has an incredible amount of bioactive peptides, like 200 plus immune boosting substances, very nutritious.
And also it has a kind of a antibacterial function, right?
Antimicrobial, antifungal. So it's probably part of what keeps them robust. And then they also eat berries. They collect berries and baobab fruit along with these other things. So they have a mixed diet where they're not eating a lot of plants, but they're getting a lot of fiber, and then they're eating animal protein as well.
Okay, so I'd like to get back to that in a while about the Hadza people. But just before that, I'd like to understand, because you mentioned antibiotics, penicillin, and its impact on the diversity of gut bacteria. So, what are the potential consequences of this impact on our health?
Tremendous, because one, when you reduce diversity in the gut, then you're increasing the possibility for inflammation in the body. And the other thing is, so this was not a human study, but it was a study done in mice where they showed that within 24 hours of a single dose of an antibiotic, the tight junction proteins that hold the cells that line the intestine, the inside of the intestine, the gut lining, there are these Velcro-like proteins that stick together, kind of like that. They form like these connections between the cells. That's what keeps the lining secure and allows for molecules to get through, like nutrients from digestion, but keeps bad things out. And what they found was that within 24 hours of antibiotics, the tight junction proteins were starting to come apart. So even just being on an antibiotic now, it could be direct or it could be indirect. It could be that the antibiotic is disrupting the gut flora, and that interface, which is really small, it's like 9 nanometers, between the gut flora, the good gut flora, and the intestinal lining is part of what's keeping this integrity. And if you disrupt the gut flora, then you're going to disrupt the integrity of the gut lining and cause leaky gut. So you get leaky gut from being on antibiotics. You can get yeast overgrowth. You can get dysbiosis and imbalance between good and bad bugs. So maybe instead of 10, 15% bad, you go to 20%, 25%. And then the person starts to not feel so good. Or maybe they start to develop other issues, gut-related health issues that they might not know are related to the fact that they were on antibiotics. Maybe they start getting yeast infections. Maybe they break out in eczema, or maybe they start getting hives. And you might not realize that all of these things are interconnected to the gut because you were on antibiotics. And how many courses of antibiotics are people usually on in a lifetime?
So after having been taking antibiotics, how can you get back? How can you restore your gut health?
That is what I've written about in both of my books, Happy Gut and the GutSMART Protocol. It can be as simple as going on a probiotic and also introducing fermented foods into the diet. And that can help to reestablish balance in the gut microbiome. There was a study done by Stanford University where they looked at the effects of a fiber-rich diet versus a high fermented foods diet on gut microbiome diversity as well as immune function. And what they found was that fermented foods increased diversity more than fiber-rich foods did. Now, it was a study that was done only over 10 weeks, so we're unsure if the study was longer, that the fiber-rich group would have started showing more diversity from the prebiotic fibers that feed the gut microbiome. But we can say at least in the short run, it seems that eating fermented foods outpaces eating fiber to improve gut microbiome diversity. And that's part of what we need to do after being on antibiotics. So sometimes as part of a regimen with patients, I'll put them on different types of probiotics that have clinically researched effects that help improve gut permeability, so reverse leaky gut, as well as improve the diversity of the gut microbiome. So like my Restore Happy Gut probiotic. But then also, if they can tolerate it, I will have them have a shot of kefir every day or incorporate some other fermented foods into the diet. I don't say that it has to be one or the other. And in the study, people were allowed to have different types of fermented foods. If someone wants to incorporate more fermented foods into your diet, I'm not going to say eat something that you don't like, right? I rather that the person eats something that they like. And then on the most ideal is if they can actually make the ferment at home. So if they can make a homemade kefir, the quality of that is going to be way greater than anything that you would buy at the store.
Yeah, I make my own kefir with raw goat milk, and I love it. I basically have it every day.
Yeah, no, I agree. That's one of the best ways to reestablish diversity in the gut microbiome, as well as maintain diversity over time. Because we talked about antibiotics as being one of the biggest gut disruptors of diversity, but then there's also pesticides. getting exposed to glyphosate, but also stress and potentially medications like acetaminophen or ibuprofen, NSAIDs. They all can disrupt gut microbiome diversity as well as create tiny little holes in the gut lining, so they increase gut permeability. So even things that people are doing on a daily basis that they think are okay because, oh, it's over the counter, it's safe, like I don't need a prescription, I don't have to talk to my doctor before I take these medications, and yet they do have real potential consequences that can affect a person's health in the long term.
Could you discuss the connection between changes in the gut microbiome and the rise of chronic diseases like obesity and diabetes?
Absolutely. It's going back to the story of the loss of diversity or dysbiosis or an imbalance between good and bad bugs that happens from antibiotics, pesticides, medications, stress. Stress itself can disrupt the gut microbiome. And also just eating too many processed foods, like eating too much sugar, too much processed carbohydrates or foods that are laden with all sorts of chemicals, or even like overemphasizing, like thinking that you're doing good by having like diet drinks that are sweetened with artificial sweeteners. All of that is going to disrupt the gut microbiome, cause dysbiosis. And when you get dysbiosis, then the next thing that's going to happen is the gut barrier is going to lose its integrity because it can't be maintained that way. There's going to be more inflammatory bugs. So then you're going to get inflammation that's going to cause leaky gut. And when you get that inflammation coming in to the body, especially in the form of different things that can be absorbed from the gut, like endotoxin from gram-negative bacteria, then what happens is you activate the immune system, you create insulin resistance, and then the person slowly starts to put on weight in the middle, and they don't know where is this coming from. Well, it's the combination of eating, exposures, environmental exposures, and stress that then's causing system-wide inflammation, disrupting the insulin signal, disrupting insulin sensitivity, and the person starts to slowly gain weight in the middle.
Okay, so how is our sugar intake linked to overgrowth of yeast? Because you mentioned yeast before. I mean, in the gut, and how does this affect our cravings? As far as I understand, the more sugar you eat, the more you crave. And how is that linked to the sugar intake?
What we know is that what we eat is controlling exactly the makeup of our gut ecosystem, right? It responds to the foods that we eat. So if you're eating too much sugar, you're going to be favoring bacteria and yeast that like to use sugar as energy, and particularly yeast, right? And so yeast can then hijack your brain through mycotoxins that make you crave more sugar. And of course, there's the sugar dopamine connection. We know that sugar triggers dopamine release in the brain. Dopamine is the reward neurotransmitter. So then that makes you want to crave more, and it starts this vicious cycle. When your gut gets full of yeast, then it almost hijacks your brain. So I'll have patients say, like, I just can't control it. Like, I just need to have sugar in that moment. The thing is, though, that people might think that, oh, I don't eat sweets, like I'm okay, but they eat a lot of fruit. Like someone who's maybe vegan or trying to be healthy, and they think like, oh, a healthy breakfast is a big bowl of fruit, and yet they don't feel well, they're feeling bloated. Maybe they have signs of yeast overgrowth, maybe vaginal itching, or they get vaginal yeast infections, and yet they continue to eat these sugary fruit that are also feeding the yeast. So it doesn't have to be that you're eating processed foods with like cane sugar. It could be that you're eating too many high sugar fruit that are also feeding the yeast in the gut.
Would you say that there is a connection between inflammation in the body and insulin resistance?
Definitely. Yeah, because when the inflammatory pathway gets activated, then the insulin receptors are not as sensitive to the insulin signal. So then your pancreas will react by producing more insulin. And as a result, the insulin signal is telling your body to then pack on more fat to conserve energy from food and turn it into fat. And then the fat in the belly, especially the visceral fat, is then going to produce the same signals that our white blood cells produce, the same cytokines, interleukins. So fat cells almost act like white blood cells, and they increase inflammation in the body. So it becomes like a feed-forward cycle. The more fat you have, the more inflammation, the more inflammatory signals, and just keeps getting more and more until you come in and you break that cycle by changing eating habits, exercising, improving the gut microbiome, and sealing the gut border, like reversing leaky gut.
So talking about insulin production, how do short-chain fatty acids produced by the gut bacteria affect insulin production?
It's quite fascinating and important, because the production of butyrate, for example, which is a short-chain fatty acid in the gut, is one of the factors that improves insulin sensitivity and blood sugar regulation. So it's having a direct effect. Some of the effects of these short-chain fatty acids are direct effects on gene expression. So they affect things like histone acetylase, which controls how the DNA is opened and what parts of the DNA are expressed. So for example, in the brain, short butyrate in the brain activates the gene that produces brain-derived neurotrophic factor. So it helps to control learning and memory in the brain.
You just talked about when you're like addicted to sugar, what you need to do is like break the addiction, making a change in your eating habits, right?
There's two factors there. Two factors, because for some people who are super addicted to sugar, it's very hard to quit. And if they have yeast overgrowth, then you're not going to be able to cut the sugar cravings until you address the yeast overgrowth in the gut. And it's quite miraculous when there is the direct link between yeast overgrowth and sugar cravings. When I put a patient on antifungals, whether it's herbal or sometimes I use prescription antifungals, or sometimes I combine them because yeast can become resistant to singular antifungals. So sometimes you want to use a combination of more than one in order to address the issue. When you treat the yeast overgrowth, the sugar cravings disappear. It's like that hijacking of the brain is gone.
That's so fascinating. I mean, that's a question that I get a lot. How do I break my sugar addiction? So I think a lot of people will find your answer really, really interesting.
It's a more holistic answer, because it's not just looking at the behavior, but it's looking at what is behind this behavior that might be the driving factor for the behavior. And for a lot of people, it could be that they have yeast overgrowth, or they have dysbiosis, they have leaky gut. So if you start working on gut health, then you can fix the sugar cravings. And it's pretty amazing how you can do that in like 7 days.
7 days, all right. Okay, so that was my next question. Basically, I mean, what happens to our gut microbiome when we consume a diet in high refined sugar, and how quickly can we change that?
It all depends on how far you've swung away from what would be like a more balanced diet. And sometimes what I have to do with patients is actually take them to the other extreme in order to heal the gut. So you might start noticing differences within the first 7 to 14 days. But it's going to take a couple of months, depending on how disordered the gut was, to really reach like a new level of balance in the ecosystem. So for example, I have a patient that has yeast overgrowth, possibly had SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, very sensitive to carbohydrates, could not tolerate a lot of foods, would just throw them into severe bloating, indigestion, like not feeling well if they ate potatoes or any like high sugar vegetables like carrots. So I actually put them on what I would call a modified carnivore diet, where I'm having them eat more meats and very limited vegetables, no fruit, maybe some berries allowed. And by swinging them over to a counter, almost like the counter of what they were doing, and addressing the underlying gut issues, we've been able to get rid of the bloating almost immediately, improve their tolerance to the things that they're eating, actually help them feel better, more energy. And within this, I want to like throw something to caution, because they were eating a pretty healthy diet to begin with. Like they weren't having lots of sugar. They weren't having like processed foods. They were eating like mostly real foods, but they were having these, let's call them carnivore chips as a snack.
Like beef jerky, or what do you mean?
No, like these, in the US, we have these chips that are made out of chicken. So they're almost like eating a chip, but it's chicken. But the interesting thing, so he was still having issues, and we were going through all aspects of the diet. And I looked at the ingredients. So this is a carnivore-like chip, but it had tapioca starch. And tapioca starch acts as a prebiotic and could also cause a lot of bloating. So I told them, well, let's take the carnivore, the chicken chips out. And instead, what I want you to do is just batch cook a bunch of chicken. And if you are feeling like you want the chicken chip snack, instead, you're going to have real meat, not something that was processed and put into a bag. And by making these little changes, the bloating has almost completely disappeared. The indigestion, the heartburn with meals, all of that has improved quite quickly. While we're also working on underlying gut issues, we did gut testing. We looked at the gut PCR. We looked at different functional markers of gut health, and we're working on rebalancing those. And it's pretty remarkable how quickly after. By the way, this person was symptomatic, like bloated, feeling horrible for 18 months before we started working together, and within less than 2 weeks was already feeling better. After 18. So for anybody who's listening, like has been sick for over a year, like they think I've been to all the doctors, like nobody's helping me. It's sometimes it's a matter of knowing exactly what are the right things to do. And sometimes people think like, well, I'm eating healthy, like I'm having salads. And well, I took salads out of his diet because they were causing too much bloating. Like it's very difficult when your gut is disordered, it's very difficult to digest raw vegetables. So that's part of why I put him on this modified kind of carnivore diet. Not 100% carnivore, because he wanted to be able to eat some vegetables. So he enjoys that. But we found the ones that don't trigger the gut issues.
Yeah, low starch diet, right?
Very low starch, yeah.
Recently, there is a lot of discussion regarding seed oils that are rich in omega-6 fats. What would you say about these seed oils? How do these, what impact do they have on your gut health?
I mean, my view of them is that they are inflammatory overall. They should not be eaten in the amounts that we are getting exposed to now. And they're very sneaky, because maybe you don't eat seed oils at home, right? And you think like, oh, I have a healthy diet. But you go out to eat and you're not asking the restaurant what oil they're using to cook your meal with. Because the majority of restaurants are using canola oil, for example, because it's a much cheaper oil than olive oil. And you might not think of that because it's not something that's obvious with the food. And these omega-6 oils are quite inflammatory. And a lot of people, the problem is the balance between omega-6 to omega-3. The ratio should be like 4-1, and many people are like 20-1, 30-1 in their ratio. They're having too many omega-6 oils and not enough omega-3s.
Okay, so now getting back to your the hunter and gatherers and the Hadza, what can we learn from the gut microbiomes of hunter-gatherer communities, and how might this knowledge influence our approach to diet and health?
There are a couple of really big things that I learned from being with a Hadza and looking at their stool studies and understanding what their diet looks like, because in functional medicine, we talk about eating the rainbow and eating this wide variety of nutrients and how important it is to be in a plant-based diet and all this, and how that creates health. And then yet I went and saw and hung out with a Hadza. And like I said before, they don't have the chronic diseases that we see out west, yet they're not eating a diversely colorful diet. The root vegetables are brown. The berries that are wild berries are not bright colored like the ones that we know. They're actually very muted in their color tones. The baobab fruit is also like brown and white, and honey. So it's very monochromatic diet. It's not this beautiful rainbow of nutrients that they looked at actually in an Italian group of control studies in the Hadza study. So the control group was from Italy, where you can imagine they're eating a Mediterranean diet with tomatoes and basil and lots of like beautiful vegetables, lots of variety. And yet the Hadza had more diverse gut microbiome, lacking a rainbow of plant nutrients, eating different animal meats and eating the root vegetables and the honey. So it's changed my viewpoint on what exactly is it that creates diversity in the gut. And I think also very important to note with the Hadza is the lack of exposure to pesticides, to antibiotics, and that they're living in the wild. So they're getting exposed to the dirt. And another thing that I noticed with them that I haven't really mentioned yet in an interview is that they also have dogs that follow them around. And dogs are microbiome multipliers. Like they are microbiome enhancers, especially the dogs are getting their sometimes their mouths into the dirt, they're smelling things, and then they come and they kiss you. And they're sharing that microbiome, that soil-based microbiome that then adds to the diversity of our own microbiome. So I think a very important point also is that they're out in the wild, they're getting exposed to dirt, they're not washing their hands with antimicrobial soaps, they're not using hand sanitizers. And I think all of these things are augmenting their gut microbiome diversity and making them more resilient to the environment. I mean, they're also outdoors. Like their level of what resilience means is they could be out hunting and then they're getting wet because it's raining, but they're okay with it. Whereas you take a Western person, they're getting wet, they get upset, my clothes is wet, where's the umbrella, where's my rain jacket? It's a very different philosophy.
Totally. So how does the fiber intake in the Hadza diet compare to modern Western diets?
Typical Western diet is people are eating like 10 to 15 grams of fiber per day, maybe up to 20 grams, some people, but most people are on the low end. And the Hadza are eating 40 to 50 grams of fiber per day is what's been calculated. And their gut is able to handle that. If you took a Westerner and you suddenly doubled or tripled their fiber intake, they're probably going to feel very bloated because it's a very big change to the microbiome. It takes some time to adapt. The Hadza have bacteria in their gut that are able to break down those fibers, because fiber by definition are short chain carbohydrates, oligosaccharides that cannot be digested by our own enzymes. So they get broken down by the gut microbiome. And the Hadza have a microbiome that is basically adapted to that because of their living conditions.
I've understood that the kind of fiber is very important. We get too much fiber from cereals like wheat and corn and oats, while we should get more fiber from vegetables and fruit. Do you agree with that?
I think the type of fiber is important. And like the Hadza aren't eating wheat, they're not eating oats, so they're not eating there's no grains. So their source of fiber is baobab fruit and root vegetables, as well as there's fiber in berries as well. But that's probably a much more minor aspect of the diet. I think their biggest source for fiber are root vegetables, and they're quite healthy with that. I don't think we need the incredible amount of grains that are eaten in the West. I think they can be harmful too.
Okay, so you mentioned eating the rainbow, and I've heard you discuss that idea of eating the rainbow all year is not practical because different foods are available in different seasons. Do seasonal changes in our diet affect our gut bacteria?
They definitely do. So the bacteria is responding to what you're eating at any point in time. And this was also very interesting because the Hadza in Tanzania have two main seasons. They have more of a dry season and they have the wet season. And their diet slightly shifts during the two seasons. Like there's a season where they might be eating more root vegetables. There's a season where they get more honey. They're harvesting honey. They're always eating animals. But with the shifts in their diet over time, they looked at, are there shifts in the gut microbiome? And they saw that there are. Like during the wet season, the microbiome is more reflective of what they're eating then, and then it shifts during the dry season. So our microbiome is constantly responding to the types of foods that we're putting into our bodies, whether good or bad. And so, but the curious thing was that with the Hadza, it seemed like certain types of bacterial phyla lineages disappeared during one season that were present in another season. And you would think that they couldn't be detected. But then when they went back to the same season eating those foods again, those bacteria reappeared. So they're always there. They're just shifting, like who is more predominant, which colonies are bigger. They're expanding and they're reducing. Kind of like interesting, like bees. A bee colony expands during the summer when there's pollen season, and then in the winter the colony will slowly shrink until the next year, and they're just surviving on the honey that they created until the winter is over. So same thing's happening with our gut microbiome in a sense.
What changes occur in our gut bacteria when we frequently change our diet, such as eating different cuisines every day? Like one day Japanese, next day Italian, for example. Is that something that affects our gut biome?
It's definitely affecting the makeup of the gut microbiome. Does it matter? Like, is it good or bad? I don't think so, as long as it's whole foods. The question is, what types of oils are you getting with that? Because if you're eating out and you're getting these different cuisines, they might not be using the healthiest oils to cook the food with. And are the vegetables organic or are they not organic? So are you getting exposed to pesticides? All those things. Are the meats grass-fed? Are they organic? Or are you getting exposed to animal meat that has been treated with antibiotics or with growth hormones, for example? So it's more a factor of that, I think, than having a variety of foods, because living in the West, we like to eat different types of things. I know, just to not get bored, like eating the same thing over and over can get monotonous. Although I'm amazed at the people like Sean Baker, the carnivore, where he's eating steak every single day. I'm not sure I could do that, even though I do love red meat. But I think I would need some variety from time to time.
A couple of years ago, we, at least in Europe and also in the US, we had this shutdowns of the societies. What effects might the isolation and lifestyle changes during the pandemic have had on people's gut microbiomes?
I think it was an incredibly stressful time for people, incredibly stressful. And stress itself is a proven gut microbiome disruptor. It causes dysbiosis, and that also leads to leaky gut. So I saw a lot of people during that time have their weight go up, like gain weight. They started stress eating, like eating a lot of processed foods, chips. People were not used to cooking at home, maybe struggled a bit, whereas people who like to eat out a lot, couldn't do that as much. So it was interesting because I saw in my patients, it was one of two things. They either started eating all the wrong things and gained weight, or they got really into cooking at home and cooking healthy, and they lost weight because they weren't eating out as much and they were working out. They started working out at home because now there was more time available. You didn't have to commute to and from the office. So maybe now you just recovered an hour from your day that now you can invest in yourself. So I think there were two very different experiences. For me, I started cooking more, and I actually started to started doing some fasting, intermittent fasting, and incorporating yoga back into my life. It's almost like people respond in the way that they would respond to any other like hormetic stressor, and some people do well with it and some people don't do as well.
So earlier you mentioned leaky gut. How does leaky gut contribute to joint pain and inflammation?
Same idea that when you have leaky gut, you're going to have exposure to more inflammatory substances from the gut. Along with those, the possibility that you get exposed to partially digested food proteins. So when there's leaky gut, there's the potential that you're going to be exposed to proteins in food that we shouldn't be exposed to, that our foods should be fully digested before they're absorbed. But if we get exposed to these short chain peptides from food, then we can actually develop a reaction to protein in food, whether it's casein or whey in dairy, or gluten in wheat. But there's also actually other proteins in wheat that we can develop immune reactions to, or any other foods that then when you're eating those foods, it's going to cause inflammation in your body. And it can also sometimes cause the formation of immune complexes. So imagine that your antibody molecules are like these goalposts. They're like these Y-shaped molecules. And if they're attaching to an antigen here, and there's another antibody, so let's say this is you're sensitive to corn, for example, and then another antibody attaches here, and then we get other molecules here, then it forms a circle. That immune complex, as we call it, so imagine it's like a chain of immune molecules linked end to end, but then they form a circle. That becomes very heavy, and it tends to precipitate in areas of the body that are colder, like our joints. And when it does that, then it can trigger an inflammatory response in the joint. So that's one possible way that leaky gut and the exposure to inflammatory substances from the gut can actually lead to things like joint pains and inflammation. And I've seen that a lot with patients where leaky gut can cause that.
And for people who travel frequently, what precautions can they take to protect their gut health? I mean, especially when exposed to new and potentially harmful microbes.
I like to send my patients who are traveling with a probiotic while they travel. They can take regular natural probiotics, like ones that are readily available, but I also like Saccharomyces boulardii, which is a favorable yeast probiotic that has been shown in studies to be really helpful for travelers' diarrhea. So when we're traveling, we're going to be exposed to different microbiomes. The other thing is remembering that fasting is a very important way to reset your gut health. And when traveling, or maybe when you're on a flight, it might be better to fast than to eat, or time the eating so you can have a fasting window, especially if you're traveling like overseas. where maybe the food is not as good on the airplane food, maybe you want to skip it or bring your own snacks with you. And traveling with the Saccharomyces boulardii, maybe another probiotic, and sometimes with magnesium because people tend to get constipated and backed up when they travel, especially from dehydration from long flights. So those are some of my travel hacks. Along with, like, you're going to Mexico, don't drink the water from the faucet.
It's like going to some countries in Asia. Don't drink the water. Don't eat leafy greens that have been, rinsed in water.
And my other hack that I really love, but might not be something that everybody wants to do, is serum-derived bovine immunoglobulins, SBIs. Those are like another version of colostrum, but for people who are maybe dairy sensitive, who can't have colostrum. And what it does is it's immunoglobulins, but they stay in the gut. They don't get absorbed into your body, into your circulation. And in the gut, they're going to bind different toxins. And a lot of times when we get exposed to a bacteria that doesn't agree with us, it's producing a toxin. So by taking the SBIs, you can also protect yourself against any like foodborne bacteria.
I think what you just mentioned, a bacteria that doesn't agree with us, because that's what it's all about, right? When we, for example, Europeans travel within Europe, it's usually okay. But as soon as you go to, for example, Northern Africa, like Morocco or Egypt, we immediately have problems, and we need to be more careful.
The microbiome is different. The type of bacteria that predominates is slightly different, whereas the people who live there are adapted to that. Their ecosystem knows how to handle it, but someone who's foreign, their ecosystem is not going to be ready for certain bacteria. Maybe it's E. coli, maybe it's Campylobacter, whatever it is. Like I said, the Hadza have Treponema in their gut. Treponema is a harmful bacteria, and yet in the Hadza, it causes no problem because it's living in this balanced ecosystem. But if you introduce that to a Westerner, it's going to make them very sick.
That's fascinating, that we are that different, and that our microbiome, depending on where we live and what culture we live, etc., that differs so much, right? We mentioned type of diet before, like carnivores, vegans, keto, etc. What are some health concerns associated with processed vegan foods?
Yeah, many. Like the fake meats and the fake burgers and all that. One, a lot of times they're using unfriendly oils in them. A lot of times they're using genetically modified corn derivatives in these types of foods. Fake chicken is usually made out of gluten. Gluten is one of the biggest gut disruptors. It actually increases gut permeability in everyone. It doesn't matter if you're celiac disease or you have non-celiac gluten sensitivity like I do, or you're normal. If you have too much exposure to gluten, it's going to increase gut permeability. It's not good for you. I actually have a story where when I was maybe 20 plus years ago, I moved to New York, and everybody goes to like these healthy restaurants. There was a restaurant back then, I think, called the Zen Palette, and it was all vegan, like fake meats. So they had a dish, and it was with what was it called? I used to joke that it should be called Satan. I think it's Seitan. It's basically fake meat. And I ate the dish and I thought, oh, I'm being so healthy. Like I'm having this big vegetable dish with noodles and seitan. I had never had seitan before. I did not know that I was gluten sensitive. After that meal, I felt so sick. Not only did I feel sick, I think that I don't think I broke out in hives, but I broke out, something in my skin got really itchy after that. And I realized, okay, I cannot eat this. I didn't still realize that it was a gluten sensitivity. But these are the things like a vegan might not know. Like they don't feel well, their hormones out of balance, and they think they're eating a super healthy diet, And I don't know if someone's vegan and listening to this, maybe they feel a little bit insulted. And I understand, like I've had many vegan patients and I've worked with many people over the years that are vegan. And I've also had the privilege to see the ones where I convinced them to start allowing a little bit of animal protein, whether it was fish, whatever they were okay with. Some were okay with having a little bit of chicken. And there was not one vegan where I had them start having some meat because they were feeling really low energy, that their energy came up 100%. Every single one felt better when they allowed themselves to have some animal protein in the diet. There was never one that did not feel better from that change. And I've seen vegans who have become meat eaters, have completely shifted. And look, I understand if you're vegan, like animal rights and all this feeling about that. But I think if you're eating humanely raised meats and animals that are treated well, is the types of meats that you want to eat anyway. You don't want to eat factory raised meats that have been treated under horrible conditions, because then you're getting an animal that's been stressed out, and that high cortisol, that stress is in the meat itself, and then you're eating that. It's not good for our bodies.
So based on your personal experiences, what do you see as the most promising areas for future research in gut health?
There's some really big things. I think it's Brain Health Month in June, and the rates of Alzheimer's disease and dementia are growing exponentially throughout the world at a rate that cannot be explained by genetics alone. I think it's environmental factors. I believe the number now is about 37 million people worldwide have dementia or Alzheimer's. And there's very strong connections between the gut, the health of the gut, and the brain. So I think that's one big area of research that we need to continue to expand upon is how can we look at gut health as a marker or risk factor for developing dementia or Alzheimer's later in life, and ways that we can start to make changes now. I think we still have a lot to understand about what makes a healthy gut microbiome, knowing that the gut microbiome in different parts of the world might look slightly different between people and yet be healthy for them. So there's not one microbiome or ecosystem that is the standard for everyone. There's a variety of microbiomes that work well for different people in different parts of the world, because we know we have blue zones not just in Okinawa, Japan, but also in I think Sardinia, Italy, and in Nosara, Costa Rica. They're different parts of the world. They're eating slightly different foods, and yet we have people who live past 100, and they're not going to have the same microbiome, but maybe they have some similarities. So I think we need to understand that more. And I think the future research is also going to be looking at ways that we can use probiotics as targeted therapies for conditions like obesity, type 2 diabetes, metabolic syndrome, weight gain, brain health stuff as well, memory loss, depression, anxiety. There's so many connections and places where we could start to develop natural interventions instead of putting people on medications that have a 50% success rate or less, because when we're talking about Alzheimer's, the success rate of medications is minimal.
For our listeners who are inspired by what they've heard here today, what are 3 practical steps they can start taking immediately to improve their gut health?
This is going to be simple. Cut back on sugar, incorporate some type of fermented food into the diet, and address your stress. You've got to work on the mind-body connection and the gut-brain connection. So that is a very important factor in overall health and the health of the gut. What I've found over the years is that if you are taking the perfect supplements, you're following the perfect diet, you can out-diet and you can out-supplement a stressed-out lifestyle. Stress is a very important factor, and it's often the last thing that people address. When they're changing their diet, they're looking to see what supplements should I take to be as healthy as possible, and yet they're living in a stressed out mode, either mentally or biophysically, like they're not getting enough sleep, they're running themselves ragged, they have a lot of work stress. So it's very important to address that, or you're never going to fully fix your gut health. So cutting back on sugar and incorporating fermented foods and addressing your stress through mind-body techniques like meditation, yoga, tai chi, qigong, getting out in nature, like going on hikes, like doing things that are soul enriching, that help lower cortisol levels and create more of a balance in the body between sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system.
So, Dr. Pedre, are there any future exciting plans or projects that you can share with us?
Well, I just launched the Gut Brain Mastery program, which is a program to teach people how to stress less in 6 weeks using the power of the gut-brain connection. So it's kind of like what I learned when I was researching is that you can hack your brain health, whether it's anxiety, depression, perceived stress, by working on your gut health. So it's almost backwards, without doing therapy, without doing other things. So my program is a 6-week program that dives into the gut-brain connection, teaches a lot about that, but also uses different techniques like meditation, breath work, and then an anti-anxiety, anti-stress diet, where I teach people how to eat to lower the way that their brain reacts to stress. And it's all based on research that I've looked up that has shown that there's certain ways to eat that actually change the way that we perceive stress. So I'm really excited about that. It's an online, available anywhere in the world. It's if you go to happygutlife.com, you can find it there. Yeah, or also easy way to find it is gutbrainmastery.com, and it's available anywhere in the world. And then the other thing that I'm really excited about, but it's going to be limited to the US for now, is launching a Happy Gut coffee that is low acid, gut friendly coffee for people like me that have very sensitive stomach, and a lot of the coffees out there don't agree with me. So I wanted to come out with something that is a solution for people who want to enjoy their coffee, because coffee has a lot of incredible health benefits that we've been writing about in our blog, including, interestingly, a substance called trigonelline, which improves muscle mass and reduces sarcopenia in people who are getting older or aging, who tend to lose muscle mass without even having to exercise. So there's a lot of benefits, gut-brain benefits with coffee. So I wanted to come out with my own Happy Gut coffee, and that's going to be happening later this year.
So where can people find you?
That is the main place, Instagram at Dr.Pedre, or they can check out my website, happygutlife.com. My books are available anywhere where books are sold, on Amazon. My latest book, the GutSMART Protocol, I also recorded it myself so it's available on Audible, and it's read by the author with a few little extra things that are not in the book, because when you're the author, you can do that. And then I'm also on like YouTube channel, Happy Gut Life, and a little bit of TikTok and LinkedIn as well.
Thank you so much, Dr. Pedre. It was so interesting to talk to you. Really fascinating.
Awesome. It was a pleasure being here with you and sharing this information. And again, I love what you do. I love the message that you're putting out. And I'm just appreciative to be able to be a part of that.
Thank you so much. Hope we can talk soon again.
This was just one episode. There's so much more to discover. Check out the full podcast series, subscribe for future episodes, and let me know your thoughts in the comments.